Have you ever believed that Bigfoot was just a myth? Then perhaps you've never heard the story of a loyal dog who saved a creature the world thought didn't exist, and the silent gesture of gratitude exchanged between a grieving woman and a towering figure of legend. One stormy night in 1991, deep in the mist-covered pines of Bondurant, Wyoming, Maren Holt, 37, widowed and living alone by the Hoback River, heard an unearthly cry. What she saw through the rain would change her life forever. A massive creature struggling in the floodwaters, while a smaller one clung helplessly to a rock. She tried everything to save the young one, but the current was too strong. And just when all seemed lost, her aging retriever, Copper, leapt into the river. Against all odds, the dog reached the little one, Bigfoot's child, and brought him back to shore. As Maren revived it, the father appeared through the downpour, towering and silent. He pressed a fist to his chest, then to the earth, a gesture that needed no words. Gratitude. What followed was a quiet alliance between a woman and a family of legends. One built on trust, sacrifice, and compassion that crossed the boundaries of species. When Copper later passed, a carved wooden token was left at her doorstep. And when Maren herself was swept into the river years later, it was the creature she once saved who came to save her. Some say the forest forgets, but the river doesn't. It remembers every kindness, every act of mercy. And maybe that's what keeps the world turning. Not power, not survival, but compassion. If this story touched your heart tonight, tell us where you're listening from. Because kindness, like a river, flows farther than we think. To each of you out there, we see you, we hear you, and we send our warmest regards. The summer storms came heavy to the Hoback River, the kind that swallowed the sky and made the pines moan. It was July of '91, and the wind off the Snake Basin carried the scent of wet bark and something older, something feral. Maren Holt had been living alone for 4 years in the cedar-planked cabin just off the bend, where the river carved a half-moon against the shale. She didn't mark time by calendars anymore, only by the way the river rose and fell and how many creaks Copper made getting up the steps each morning. He was an old search and rescue dog, half lab, half mutt, all heart. Together they shared the quiet, the coffee, the static hum of the AM band, and the weight of things left unsaid. That evening, thunder rolled like someone shifting furniture in the attic of the world. Rain pounded the tin roof until it drowned the newsman's voice, though she barely listened anymore. Something about early floods upriver, a landslide near Moose Creek. Maren sipped her coffee anyway, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, waiting for that one flash that came too close. Copper lay curled by the stove but kept one ear perked, flicking each time the wind shifted. The smell of river moss drifted in under the door frame. At some point in the night, the storm grew so loud, it snapped her out of sleep. It wasn't the thunder. It was Copper. He was up, hackles raised, growling low, his gaze fixed on the dark beyond the window. She pulled on her boots and coat without thinking, flashlight in hand, and stepped out onto the front porch. Rain slapped her face like a warning. Her breath came out in puffs, mixing with the steam rising off the soaked earth. And then she heard it. Not the wind, not the coyotes. Something else. A sound that didn't belong to the forest or the weather. It was raw, desperate, vibrating deep and low, somewhere between a groan and a howl. Her skin prickled as she raised the flashlight and scanned the dark. Through the curtain of rain, a flicker of movement down near the riverbank caught her eye. She squinted. There, midstream. Something massive, thrashing against the current. Behind it, perched on a slick stone like a ghost clinging to a dream, a smaller shape, frail, clinging, slowly sliding toward the water's hungry pull. A bolt of lightning cracked open the sky, illuminating it all in a blinding white. The bigger one had shoulders broader than any man, soaked fur plastered to its back, and a face. Not beast, not man, But something in between, something wild and knowing. Eyes the color of amber lit up with panic. Not rage, not instinct. Pure panic. Like a father losing a child. Maren's stomach turned cold. She didn't move for a second. Then she dropped the flashlight and ran. Back inside. Grabbed the old rope from under the sink. The one fraying near the loop, but still good enough for emergencies. She'd tied it 1,000 times in training back when her hands didn't shake, and she still believed in second chances. Copper barked behind her, sharp and urgent. She threw the rope over her shoulder and sprinted toward the edge, mud sucking at her boots. The current was wild, angry, swollen. She braced herself, looped one end around the cedar post buried deep near the porch, and launched the coil toward the middle of the river. Too short. The rope hit the water and whipped away like a snake. She tried again. And again. Her hands raw, her breath ragged. The current laughed at her. Across the water, the larger creature beat the surface with both hands, roaring. She could feel it more than hear it. A sound that shook in her chest and echoed off the walls of her past. The storm above didn't matter anymore. The only storm that mattered was inside. The kind that had taken her husband 5 years ago in a wildfire so fast it melted steel. She hadn't reached him in time. She'd stood behind the yellow tape while the sky turned black and the hills burned like paper. Her voice back then had gone hoarse, screaming his name. Now here she was again, a woman on the bank, useless, watching something she could save slip away. "No," she whispered. Copper was at her side, whining. "No," she said again, louder. She knelt, gripping the rope like it could pull her back in time. "Please," she whispered. "Not again." Then, without a sound, Copper backed up and leapt. Straight into the river. She screamed, but he didn't look back. His gray-muzzled face broke the surface once, then again. Each stroke sharp and practiced. He angled himself not directly at the drowning figure, but diagonally, riding the current like a memory slipping downstream. The same way they'd taught him back in Bridger County search and rescue, before the gray on his chin, before the limp in his back leg. The old dog still remembered. Maren stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes stinging, not just from the rain. The river surged. The child creature, no more than 3, maybe 3.5 feet, was slipping off the rock, tiny hands flailing. Its face, soft brown fur matted to the skin, eyes wide and terrified, nose too human, lips too trembling, was the face of something not meant to die like this. Copper reached it just in time, turned sideways, and allowed the creature to grab on. And then, something impossible. The larger being on the far shore stopped roaring. It watched. Then it moved, into the water, not lumbering, not charging, swimming. Long arms cut through the flood with terrifying strength. His form disappeared behind waves, reappeared in flashes of lightning, and for one moment, in the eye of the storm, the 3 of them met. Copper carrying life on his back, the giant moving toward them. Maren running alongside the riverbank, soaked to her bones, yelling without hearing herself. She reached a bend where the current eased slightly, where debris usually snagged on the roots of old trees. She jumped down, boots sliding in the mud, reached for Copper as he approached. Her fingers found wet fur, then tiny arms, slick with cold. She pulled the small one in first, then the dog, both trembling and slick with river water. The creature gasped, choking on air, collapsed on her chest, heaving. Maren rolled onto her side, cradling it like instinct, pressing the back of her hand against its chest. No breath. She pressed down, slow, steady. Again, a cough, then another, then a whimper. The child breathed. She looked up. He was there, standing just a few yards away, water dripping from his massive frame. 8.5 feet, maybe more. Fur the color of soaked walnut bark. Rain ran down his face like tears. His eyes met hers, amber, wide, too full. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. then brought his fist to his chest and touched the ground with it, heart to earth. She didn't understand it, but she felt it. A thank you that came from marrow, not mouth. She nodded. Then, behind her, Copper let out a single huff and laid his head down. His sides rose and fell, weak but steady. For a long time, no one moved. The river kept roaring. The sky kept crying. But something in the world shifted that night. Something old remembered something older, and Hoback Forest was quiet again. Not empty, just quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. The rain hadn't let up. It fell in thick sheets that blurred the tree line and turned the riverbank into soft clay. Maren stood knee-deep in it, soaked to her skin, chest heaving as she clutched the rope she'd thrown again and again into the current, each attempt swallowed by the flood. Her hands were trembling from cold and failure. Across the raging water, the enormous figure still stood waist-deep, arms raised toward the sky, eyes burning through the storm. He slammed his hands into the water again and again, sending up angry sprays. The sound he made wasn't human, but it wasn't wild either. It was grief. Something was dying inside that sound, and it struck a place in her chest that hadn't stopped aching in 5 years. She tightened her grip on the rope and stepped forward, then back again. The current was faster now, swelling. She tried to spot the same rock where the child had clung, but the river had swallowed it. Mud swirled, branches shot past, and still the figure across the water screamed at the storm, at the river, at the world. She knew that sound. She'd made it once, in the dead of night, in the center of a forest glowing orange. It came back to her now like a ghost refusing to fade, flames licking up the hillside behind her as she clutched a radio that only spat static. She'd screamed his name until her throat cracked, but there'd been no answer. She remembered standing helpless at the fire line while the sky collapsed inward, watching as the trees were devoured, and her husband's last location blinked off the GPS screen for good. No body, no final words, just smoke and silence. The rope slipped through her fingers. She dropped it, sank down in the mud. Her knees hit hard, but she didn't flinch. Her hands shook as she covered her face, teeth clenched. "Please," she whispered. "Not again." Copper whined beside her. She looked over. He was staring at her, unmoving. Rain ran in rivulets off his muzzle. His eyes were old, clouded, but locked onto hers like they understood more than she ever gave him credit for. His whole body was tense, not with fear, but with a question. He took a step back, then another. Then, without warning, he launched. "No!" she screamed, too late. His body hit the water with a splash that disappeared beneath the roar of the flood. For a second, she saw only waves. Then his head broke through, angled toward the opposite bank. He wasn't fast anymore. His hind leg dragged, but he was strong, the kind of strength that doesn't come from muscle but from memory. The current pulled him sideways, but he adjusted like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Years ago, when he was a young dog, built for snow and fire rescues. When he ran beside her through the mountains and their lungs burned with the cold, and the world still made sense. Back when the worst thing they'd faced was a broken leg or a wrong trail. Before the calls stopped coming. Before grief became a second skin. Now he swam with purpose, nose high, paws churning. Maren stood frozen, hands pressed to her mouth, watching him drift farther. Then, through the blur of rain, she saw it. A small form bobbing, half submerged, no longer clinging to rock, but tumbling. The river had taken the child. Its arms flailed once, then went limp. Its head dipped below, then came up again, coughing. Copper adjusted course. It was instinct. Training. Heart. He paddled diagonally, letting the current work in his favor, not against it. The same technique they'd drilled into the team for years. If you want to reach someone, don't fight the flood. Ride it. Cut across. Save them where the river lets you. The creature across the river saw it too. The giant stopped screaming, and then something shifted. He stepped deeper into the river, massive legs bracing against the current. His eyes never left Copper, or the child. Maren saw him raise his arm toward the sky once more, but this time, not in rage. He made a sound. Low, guttural. It rolled across the water like thunder cracking open the mountain. The trees behind him shuddered. Then he let the sound go quiet. Copper reached the child. His body turned just enough to let the creature grab hold. The small arms clung to him, desperate, claws sinking into wet fur. Its face, so young, so impossibly human in its terror, pressed against the dog's soaked back. Copper didn't pause. He turned his head, checked the hold, then kicked forward, the weight making him dip lower. Maren ran. Her boots slipped in the mud. Her knees burned. But she didn't stop. She followed the bank, watching the current. It was pulling them downstream. Hard. She knew the river's rhythm by now, where it curled and hissed against rocks, where trees bowed low over the water like sentries. She reached the old willow bend, where sandbars formed during low summer. Even in a flood, it slowed here. Just enough. She slid down the embankment and into the shallows, water up to her thighs. "Come on," she whispered. "Just a little more." The child's eyes met hers, wide, terrified. Copper swam harder. Behind them, the large figure was no longer on the opposite shore. He was in the water, and moving fast. Each stroke of his arm sent ripples that fought the current. His head bobbed low, shoulders breaching like a bear, his chest heaving with effort. The river wasn't pulling him. It was parting for him. In the storm's center, the three of them converged. Maren reached out. Her fingers brushed fur. First Copper, then the small body clinging to him. She grabbed the child under its arms and hauled it toward her, stumbling backward as its weight hit her chest. It was heavier than it looked. Soaked and shaking, limbs limp with cold. Its breath came in gasps, eyes rolling, one hand still clutching Copper's collar like it didn't know what else to hold. She laid it on the bank and dropped to her knees. Checked for breath. Too shallow. Pressed her hands to its tiny chest. Rhythmic. Gentle. Again and again. "Come back, please." The child's chest rose. Then again. Then, finally, a cough. A long, rattling, miserable sound that tore out of its throat like a soul returning from the dark. It cried, and she sobbed. Copper lay down beside it, muzzle pressed against the creature's hand. Then a shadow fell over them. She looked up. He was there, soaked, shaking, eyes burning with something she couldn't name. He towered above her, water still streaming off his fur in long ropes. His breath came in great pulls, chest expanding with each one. But he didn't come closer. He stood, still, watching, waiting. Maren raised her hand slowly. Not in fear, not in warning. Just raised it. He took one step forward, then another. Then, quietly, deliberately, he brought his massive fist to his chest, pressed it once, then knelt and touched the muddy ground, heart to earth. The same gesture, not a plea, a recognition, a language without words. Her lip trembled. She nodded once. Behind her, the child whimpered. A high, soft sound that made the giant close his eyes. He moved then, not toward the child, but beside it. Sat cross-legged in the mud, hands resting on his knees. His presence calmed the air. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. He looked at Copper and nodded once, deep and slow. The dog blinked, let out a sigh, then laid his head down in the wet grass. Maren wiped her eyes. She didn't understand any of it. Not the gesture, not the language, not even why she wasn't afraid. All she knew was that something had happened in the current tonight that would change the rest of her life. She looked down at the child. Its hand had found hers. Tiny fingers wrapped around two of hers, claws barely digging in. Not wild, not beast. Just alive. The storm was beginning to move east, wind pulling at the treetops like whispers retreating. Maren tilted her head to the sky. Raindrops hit her lashes, but her face stayed turned upward. because something had been returned, something she'd thought long gone. And in the distance, the first faint call of morning birds echoed through the Hoback trees like a prayer remembered after silence. The rain had not let up. If anything, it had settled into that steady, unrelenting rhythm that seeped into bones and slowed the world. Down by the Hoback River, the water had swallowed the rocks, climbed up over the roots of cottonwoods, and turned every step into a gamble. But none of that mattered now, because Copper was in the current, swimming like he hadn't in years, angled not for speed, but for survival. Maren had seen it before, long ago, on those winter calls when a skier went missing or a child wandered too far into the canyon fog. That diagonal swim, part instinct, part training, was how you fought something stronger than yourself. Not by force, but by knowing how to move with it. He swam at a slant, letting the river take him just enough to keep his balance. His chest broke the surface in rhythmic heaves, every kick measured. The water was high and fast and cold, but Copper's body remembered what her hands had long forgotten. Not far ahead, the small shape bobbed near a slick boulder, slipping farther each second. The creature didn't cry out anymore. Its energy was gone. It was holding on the way some animals do when they know they're out of time. Not with panic, but with instinct. Maren ran the bank as best she could, sliding through mud, heart punching against her ribs. The rain blurred everything but the movement in the water. She wasn't even aware she was shouting until her throat burned. Her boot struck something hard, driftwood maybe, and she nearly went down. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Across the water, the father moved too. She caught sight of him through the trees. He was running parallel to the river, massive feet pounding through sodden leaves, dodging trunks like he'd been born in this forest. She could hear him even over the storm. The sound wasn't rage now. It was something closer to a command, like he was calling out across the water, not just to the child, but to her. A single deep note, carried by wind, shaking the canopy. Copper reached the child, just as its fingers lost grip on the boulder. The small body slipped under, then a paw swept forward and caught it. Copper twisted in the current, positioning himself so the creature could climb onto his back. It didn't struggle. It clung, its long arms wrapped tight around his neck, legs dangling. Its face turned just enough for Maren to glimpse the expression, terrified, but alive. The features were smaller than the father's, more human somehow. Wide-set amber eyes, flattened nose, a thin coat of soaked brown fur sticking close to the skin. But the face wasn't that of a wild thing. It was a child's face, a face that looked toward help and held on when it found it. The moment seared itself into her mind, a battered old rescue dog, gray-muzzled and trembling, carrying a legendary creature across a flood-swollen river, while its father crashed through the forest in tandem, and a woman who'd buried her hope years ago ran the bank screaming their names, even though she didn't know them. The world should have stopped then, but the river kept moving. Copper's legs were tiring. Maren could see it. His strokes weren't as clean, his hips dipped lower with each surge. The child's weight was too much, the cold too deep. The rain hadn't let up, and the nearest spot with a slope gentle enough for a rescue was still 100 yards downstream. She ran harder. The river curved ahead into a wider channel, where she remembered the current slowed just enough to grab hold of a floating log, or a dog, or a child. That's where she needed to be. Her lungs burned. She reached it seconds before they did, fell to her knees, arms outstretched, shouting Copper's name through the noise. He saw her. He turned. The child clung tighter. Maren waded in, up to her thighs, then her waist. The cold punched her gut like a fist. She didn't care. She locked eyes with Copper. She saw him falter, but he didn't stop. His paws kept going, each one slower than the last. And then, he was close enough. She grabbed hold of the small body first, slick and heavy and shivering. It didn't fight her. It just buried its face against her coat as she backed up, dragging them both onto the bank. Her arms locked around it like a reflex. She didn't have time to think. Copper collapsed in the shallows beside them, chest heaving, eyes dull but aware. She laid the child on its side. Its chest wasn't moving, no. She pressed her ear to its ribs. Nothing. She tilted its head, cleared its airway, and began compressions. Not with panic, but with that deep memory of what hands do when the heart has gone quiet. She counted under her breath. She pressed again. Again. A cough jerked through the tiny chest. Water spilled from its mouth, then a wheeze, then a breath, then the whimper of a frightened creature who realized it was still alive. She held it close, let it cry against her. Its breath came in shudders, its fur cold against her skin. Then the trees parted. She looked up. The father stood at the river's edge, soaked and still, massive shoulders rising and falling. His arms hung at his sides, not in defeat, but in stillness. His eyes were locked on the child. Maren didn't move. He stepped forward, boots sloshing through mud, bare feet splayed like a gorilla's, but posture upright, full of intent. The storm lit the sky behind him. His face came into view, weathered, ancient, yet unmistakably intelligent. The fur on his chest stuck in clumps. His hands trembled, but not from fear. He was close now, close enough to end her if he wanted. But he didn't. He knelt. His massive fist rose to his chest, then lowered to the earth. The same gesture. Heart, ground, water. Like the first time, but now slower, deeper, like something sacred passed between them. The child reached out, a small hand gripping the edge of its father's arm. Their eyes met. Maren stepped back. The father curled one arm around the child's back, the other around Copper. He looked at the dog as though seeing him for the first time. His brows furrowed, not with confusion, but with something closer to awe. Then, slowly, he lowered his forehead toward Copper's head, resting it there for a moment. Maren held her breath. Then he stood, picked up the child gently, cradled it against his chest. The child looked back at her over his shoulder. For a moment, the world seemed to go still again. Then he turned and disappeared into the tree line. No sound, no trail, just gone. The rain eased. Copper whimpered. Maren knelt, ran her hands through his soaked fur, pressed her forehead to his. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought him back." He closed his eyes. They stayed there like that for a long time, until the sky lightened and the storm finally moved on, leaving behind only mist and the memory of something that should not have happened, but did. And down the river, far into the trees, something watched, something remembered. The storm broke just before dawn, not with drama, but quietly, like it had finally run out of anger. The wind softened into hushes through the pine boughs, and the rain, once violent, gave way to a slow, cold drizzle that clung to everything. Mist crawled across the forest floor in threads, coiling around roots and broken branches, rising in lazy breaths above the Hoback River. It wasn't silence exactly. The world still made noise. Dripping leaves, a distant woodpecker tapping, the occasional creak of the trees stretching after a long night. But it was the kind of quiet that settles only after something wild has passed through. The kind that listens. Maren knelt on the muddy bank, her jeans soaked, arms wrapped tight around the small creature whose heart now beat against her ribs. She felt it fluttering, light but steady, like a bird just waking from a long sleep. The fur on its back was matted, tangled with river debris, but warm now from the press of her body. It didn't cry anymore, just whimpered, soft and spaced between shaky breaths. She held on, one hand around its shoulders, the other cradling its tiny wrist. Her eyes were locked on Copper. He lay only a few feet away, half in the water, half on land, chest heaving slow, like each breath took more effort than the last. Mud streaked his side. His eyes blinked once, slow, deliberate, and found her. That was all he could manage. He didn't lift his head, didn't wag his tail, but the look in his eyes said enough. He'd done what he came to do. She whispered his name once and pressed her forehead to his. The child stirred in her lap. Maren pulled back gently, enough to see its face in the soft gray light. It blinked up at her, dazed but alert, eyes a rich amber that caught what little light the sky offered. The face was strange and familiar all at once. Cheeks soft like any toddler's, brow wide and slightly furrowed. The fine, wet fur parting just enough to reveal thin, olive-toned skin underneath. A short, dark beard barely framed the mouth, more like the beginnings of whiskers than anything adult. And the expression wasn't that of an animal. It was a child's, exhausted, unsure, trying to decide whether it was safe to cry. She reached for its chest again, laying her palm flat over the spot where she'd pressed before. The breath was there, unsteady, but it was there. She let her hand stay there a while longer, just to feel it. Then something shifted behind her. A sound, not loud, not sudden, just heavy. She turned, and there he was. The father stood only a few steps away, shoulders hunched as if weighed down by the river itself. His fur clung to him in soaked ropes, some of it slicked with mud, streaked with pale gray at the temples and chest. He was close enough now that she could see the contours of his face clearly. Deep-set eyes, flat nose, strong, human-like mouth. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of someone who'd swum across floodwaters in the dark, then run through wet forest just to find his child breathing. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there looking down. His eyes didn't move from the child. And the child, sensing something, turned in her arms. It didn't flinch, didn't cry out. It reached. A small, trembling hand lifted, fingers curling, stretching toward that towering figure like a child recognizing the smell of home. The father stepped forward, knees lowered, hands opened. One palm down first, slow, fingers splaying into the mud, then the other. Then he lowered into a squat, weight evenly distributed, powerful legs flexing, his back bowed slightly but stable, steady. He didn't reach. He waited. Maren glanced down. The child was shifting, now trying to climb from her lap, unsure of where its strength had gone but determined anyway. She helped, gently sliding her arms out from under it, guiding its feet until they touched solid ground. It stumbled once, then stood. They looked at each other for a moment, father and child. And then the child stepped forward, barefoot in the mud, walked the few steps between them, and leaned into the giant chest with all its weight. The father let out a sound then. Not a word, not a growl. Just a low, trembling breath that seemed to empty the whole of his lungs in one go. He wrapped both arms around the child, cradled it, pressed his face down into its shoulder. The massive frame trembled just once. Maren didn't move. She didn't want to interrupt whatever this was. Not grief, not joy, something older. The kind of emotion that comes when you lose everything, then get it back just enough to feel the pain again. She watched as he pulled the child tighter. Then, slowly, he stood, holding the small body against his chest like a parent carrying a sleeping toddler upstairs. The child turned its head toward her over his shoulder. Its eyes found hers. And then the father looked at her too. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if anything should be said. But he answered anyway. He took one step toward her, then another. And then he did something that made her heart stop for just a moment. He brought his right fist to his chest, slowly, deliberately. Then he dropped to one knee, touched that same fist to the mud. Heart, earth, water. It was a ritual now. She knew it in her bones. Not just a thank you, not just a greeting, a sacred thing. Something passed down, not in words, but in gesture. She rose to her feet. She didn't try to match the strength of it. She simply placed her hand to her own chest, just over her heart, then bent slightly at the waist and let her fingers brush the earth. When she stood, his eyes were still on her, amber and knowing. Copper let out a soft whine. The creature looked toward the dog, then walked to him. He didn't speak. didn't gesture, just crouched again and placed a hand, massive, knuckled, scarred, on the old dog's flank. The pressure was gentle, reverent. Maren watched the dog's body relax under the touch. Then the father stood, child still in his arms, and backed away into the mist. No fanfare, no farewell, just the sound of wet feet sinking into soft ground. And then the trees swallowed him. She stood there long after they vanished, holding her breath, half expecting the forest to give them back again. But it didn't. Only the wind answered. Only the cold morning mist. She turned to Copper. His breathing was thin now, his body still. But when she touched him, his tail tapped once against the mud. She smiled and broke, dropped to her knees and pressed her face into his side, whispering words she hadn't said in years. Thank you. Good boy. I love you. You saved them. You saved them. The mist thickened around them like a curtain slowly falling. The world didn't feel heavy anymore. Not because the weight was gone, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone else had carried it with her. And just beyond the line of trees, where the ground sloped gently toward the river, the shape of a tall figure lingered, half hidden in fog. He stood still for a moment longer, then vanished into the timber, and the woods, for a time, remembered how to be quiet again. The air changed before the men arrived. Maren felt it in her bones the way animals did, in the stillness of the underbrush, the way the wind shifted direction without a sound. That morning the river had calmed, and the forest held its breath. There was no rain, just the soft drip of water falling from pine needles, and the hush of something unseen moving through the trees. Copper slept beside the porch, wrapped in the old wool blanket she'd used since his first rescue run in '84. He barely stirred now. His breathing had grown slow, chest rising like a bellows worn soft with time. She sat beside him, carving a piece of driftwood without really thinking. Not for art, not for function, just the motion of it. Her hands needed something to do while her thoughts wandered back to the night the river swallowed and returned something that never should have existed. She hadn't told anyone, not yet, not the ranger station, not anyone in Bondurant. She didn't need to. The woods had a way of whispering what words shouldn't. By noon, the sound of truck tires chewing gravel crept up from the dirt road. Not fast, not casual, just deliberate. 2 engines, heavy tread. She didn't get up, just watched as a white pickup turned onto her path, mud crusted along the fenders, a red jerry can tied with bungee to the back. The second truck was older, green with a cracked side mirror and a front bumper that sagged just enough to show it had been welded by someone who didn't care much about finesse. They parked with engines still running. Out stepped Wade Cully, 6'1", shoulder-length hair always tucked under the same faded camo cap, and a beard that never looked quite honest. He was the kind of man who killed elk for fun and black bears for bragging rights. Said he did it for meat, but Maren had seen the row of antlers zip-tied to his shed wall. His boots hit the ground like he wanted people to hear him coming. Behind him climbed out Mick Talley, shorter, stockier, always 5 seconds behind Wade, like a shadow that didn't know how to cast itself alone. They didn't wave, just looked around like they had a right to the place. Maren stood. Wade smiled the way men do when they think they've already won something. Heard the dog's been barking down this way. That true, Holt? She didn't answer, just lifted the kettle off the stove and poured 2 tin mugs of coffee, 1 in each hand. She stepped to the edge of the porch and held them out. Wade took one. Mick followed, muttering a half thank you. They said you saw something, Wade continued, sipping too quick and wincing. Weird tracks. Maybe a bear that ain't walked right. I didn't say anything, Maren replied, voice flat. Well, someone sure did, he said, nodding toward the direction of town. Old man Hank said your radio call sounded spooked. She didn't blink. You believe everything Hank says, you'll end up chasing ghosts and skunk apes till you die in a ditch. Wade chuckled, but it was forced. Behind the men, Copper stirred. Not a bark, not a growl, just a low rumble in his throat. His nose pointed toward the willow grove that bordered the river, dense, low-growing branches that wept into the water's edge like curtain tassels. That was when Maren knew. She turned her head just slightly, eyes trailing toward the thickest part of the brush. There, a shape, still and dark, no more than a shadow among shadows, but alive, watching. The men didn't see it yet. Mick walked a few paces toward the bank, squatting near the dirt where the mud still hadn't settled from the storm. "Big tracks here," he said. "Real big. Looks fresh, too." Maren stepped off the porch, her boots silent in the damp grass. "Moose," she said plainly. Wade cocked his head. "That's so? Big Bull came down this way every spring. Leaves sign, tramples low brush, bathes near the bend." She paused. "Or maybe just a tourist who eats too many donuts." He didn't laugh. She looked down. The prints were wide, yes, but the rain had blurred them. Nothing left to measure. No detail to call anything by name. Still, something in Wade's posture shifted. He sniffed the air. "What's that smell?" Maren didn't answer. He stepped closer to the river. Mick followed, pushing aside willow limbs. Then, like a match struck in the dark, Copper barked, loud, once, sharp enough to freeze both men mid-step. Then, a rustle. Not far, just beyond the thicket. Wade spun, hand reaching for the rifle he always kept slung low on his shoulder. He didn't raise it, but the intent was there. Maren moved quickly, stepping between him and the brush. "Don't," she said, voice edged now. Wade narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "Because whatever's out there, if it's still out there, don't mean you harm." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure enough to bet my life on it." Wade hesitated. Then the wind shifted. A smell rolled through the clearing, musky, wild, not foul, just unfamiliar. Wet earth and matted fur and something like cedar. The dogs in the back of Wade's truck went ballistic, snarling and kicking their crates. Mick took a step back. Wade's fingers tensed on the stock. Copper barked again, this time not at the river, but at Maren, like a warning or a question. The moment held, tight. Then Maren did something she hadn't planned. She clapped her hands, loud, 3 times. Not random, not chaotic. Sharp and clear, like a ranger giving signal in the woods. The shape in the willows shifted, then vanished. Gone like smoke on cold air. Wade cursed, spinning toward the sound. "Moose?" Mick said, voice shaky. Maren didn't turn. "Could be." Wade's eyes were dark now, calculating. "We'll keep looking," he muttered. "No need," she said. "Storm scared off whatever it was. We'll be the judge of that." They turned back toward their trucks. She watched them go. Didn't wave. Didn't follow. Just waited until the engines faded. Then she walked slowly toward the willow grove. Her boots brushed aside branches still wet from the night. At the edge, she paused, lowered herself down, and looked for what she knew she'd find. Nothing. No sign. No print. But the feeling remained. Someone had been there. Someone had trusted her to keep them safe. And she had. For now, she exhaled, stood, and looked toward the high ridge. Somewhere out there they watched. Not out of fear, out of caution, because even one misstep, one wrong human, could turn trust to ruin. She turned back to the cabin. Copper was waiting, eyes still on the trees. The old dog always knew. And in the distance, beyond the bend of the Hoback, a mother with gentle amber eyes led her child deeper into the forest, away from the scent of gun oil and human doubt, carrying with her the fragile memory of a kindness not yet broken. Under the stillness of late summer, the forest returned to its slower rhythm. The river pulled back into its banks, and the smell of wet bark gave way to sun-warmed pine and the quiet weight of August mornings. The hills dried in streaks of ochre and green. Light came gentler now, slipping through the canopy like warm breath on skin. Maren noticed the change in the air first, the same way she noticed the way Copper no longer stood without help, the way he sighed more than barked, the way his eyes lingered on things longer, like he was memorizing them. He didn't climb the porch stairs anymore. She carried him, wrapped in the blue quilt stitched by her mother in a year she didn't talk about. Every morning she laid him in the soft spot near the edge of the garden, where sun hit his back first. He didn't fight it, just watched the trees. Sometimes his ears flicked toward something deep in the timber, something only he could hear. A memory, maybe. Or goodbye. Maren moved through her days with a quiet steadiness, tending to the same fences, boiling the same coffee, listening to the same groaning of the old radio when the signal flickered in from Jackson. But something inside her had changed. The edges of her grief had softened, like stones turned smooth by 1,000 turns of the river. She didn't check the calendar anymore. Time now was measured in breaths, in looks, in the warm weight of Copper's head on her boot. On a Tuesday morning, sky washed clean and air smelling of cut grass and wood smoke. He didn't get up. She knew before she touched him. His eyes were open just enough to catch the light. His body still warm but motionless. She knelt beside him and pressed her palm to the patch of fur behind his ears, where he liked to be scratched on the long rides back from rescues, where he always leaned into her touch. Her throat closed. She brushed a twig off his shoulder. His paws were curled, like he'd gone in sleep, like he hadn't fought it, like he'd known it was time. She stayed beside him for hours. Didn't cry at first. She just sat. The sky moved slowly over them, the light shifting across his fur, and still, she didn't move. When the sun dropped low enough to stretch long shadows from the trees, she finally stood. Her legs trembled. Her breath came in like wind from a deep, dry canyon. She lifted his body carefully, blanket and all, and carried him to the porch, the same way she'd carried him from every storm, every trailhead, every fire line. The weight was familiar, but final now. That night, sleep didn't come. The cabin held a silence she didn't recognize. It wasn't just the absence of a dog's breath or the scratch of claws on the wood floor. It was something deeper, a silence that filled the corners, that pressed in at her ribs, that lingered at the base of the stairs like someone watching. She left the door open, just in case. Before first light, a sound woke her. Not loud, a shift of gravel, a whisper of something soft. She stepped out onto the porch barefoot. The fog had rolled in, thick and low. She squinted, and there, resting on the top step, was a small object wrapped in an old flannel scrap, weathered red and black like something out of a workman's closet. Her hands reached for it before her brain caught up. Inside, a piece of wood, hand-carved but crude, shaped unmistakably like a sleeping dog. Its back curved, tail tucked, one ear folded, and beneath it, folded neatly, was her rescue blanket. The old one, the one she thought had been carried off by the storm weeks ago, now pressed and returned with reverence. Her breath caught. She looked to the tree line. Nothing moved. No sound. But someone had come. Someone had known. Tears came then. Not in waves, not with violence, but in the kind of silence that breaks you from the inside out. She held the carving close, ran her fingers over the imperfect lines, the scratches, the marks of something wild trying to speak in the only language it knew. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. It was kindness. It was grief shared. And in the slow dawn light, with the fog thinning into gold and the forest returning to breath, she felt something press against her chest, just beneath the ache. It was thanks. Later that morning, as the mist lifted and the hills emerged one tree at a time, she walked to the small clearing near the edge of the woods. There, beneath the cedar where Copper used to chase squirrels and sleep belly up in the shade, she dug a hole wide enough to hold him gently. She wrapped the carved dog and the blanket together, resting them beside him, then knelt in the dirt and placed her hand on the earth. No words, just the thud of her heartbeat, and the memory of a fist pressed to a chest, then to the ground. Heart, earth, water. That night, the wind came down from the ridge, colder now, whispering through the windows like a voice too far away to understand. She sat by the fire, the carved dog on the mantel, and watched the flames bend and crackle. Outside, the woods were quiet. The kind of quiet that says something is watching over you, even if you never see it. And just past midnight, just before the logs collapsed into coals, she thought she saw movement by the tree line. A tall shape, motionless. Amber eyes, catching moonlight. Then gone. Not vanished. Returned. To wherever they go when the danger has passed. When the thanks has been said. When grief has found its match. And the cabin held its silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of something sacred. Something remembered. The first storm of fall came before the leaves had time to turn. It rolled over the Hoback Valley in the middle of the night, starting with a wind that whistled through the pine crowns like a low warning. By morning, the air was colder, and the river had changed its voice. It no longer babbled, it growled. Rutted paths became thin trails of mud, and every root beneath Maren's boots felt slippery, uncertain. She knew this kind of storm. It didn't come for drama. It came to test the banks. She woke early, same as always, pulled on her flannel and jeans, filled her thermos, and stepped into the wet hush that only came in early October. The sky hadn't made up its mind yet. Dull gray, but holding back. She checked the fence, scanned the ridge, then walked the narrow trail behind the cabin down to the bend in the river. The place where everything always changed first. Her breath misted in front of her. The water was high already. Too high for this time of year. It licked at the willow roots and pulled with a current too quick for comfort. A few logs had already lodged against the boulders near the far bend. She could feel the land shifting beneath her, the way it does when it's been soaked too long. That's when she saw it. The bank not 10 feet to her left cracked. A subtle fracture, just a whisper of motion. But enough. Her boot hit the edge as it gave way. There was no time to scream. No time to reach. The earth disappeared beneath her, and gravity took the rest. She fell sideways into the pull of the river, her arms pinwheeling once before cold took hold. Water closed over her like a shutter slamming down on light. The current grabbed her legs first, spinning her, slamming her ribs into something hard, rock or root. She couldn't tell. Her lungs stung, her mouth filled with mud and river grit. She kicked blindly, broke the surface once, sucked in a half-breath, then slipped under again. Everything blurred, gray, green, brown. The roar inside her head louder than the water itself. Then a flash. Not from above, from beside her. A shape, dark and massive, cut into the current. Not floating, diving, moving toward her. She reached without knowing what for. Her fingers met fur, thick, soaked, bracing against the rush. Then arms, strong as tree trunks, curled around her chest, lifting. Not dragging, guiding. Her feet scraped something solid. She kicked with what little strength she had left, the water still thrashing behind them. Then air. She broke the surface, coughing, gasping, held against a wall of heat and muscle. She was being carried, not by current, but by force. Through the torrent, she saw the slope, roots of a willow like wet fingers reaching toward them. He was pushing against the flood, legs planted wide, back bent low, one arm gripping her, the other braced into the earth like an anchor. His breath came out in deep, hard bursts, every motion focused, every movement certain. They reached the base of the bank. He shoved her upward first. Not roughly, with urgency. Her hands grabbed the roots. She hauled herself up, boots finding soft ground again. She collapsed forward onto the slope, coughing water and dirt, her body trembling. When she turned, he was still in the river, chest deep now, the current pulling, fighting. He stood there watching her. Amber eyes, soaked fur, that same face she'd seen before, human-like, solemn, unreadable. Then he did it again, fist to chest, down to earth. Even in the water he made the gesture. Maren crawled forward, hand on her chest, lips trembling. She returned it. Then, as quick as he came, he turned. and let the current take him downstream. Not with fear, with ease. Like he trusted the river not to keep him long, she watched his form blur into the mist, the water carrying him like driftwood that chose its own path. Her fingers dug into the mud. Her chest burned, not just from the near drowning, but from the knowing. He'd been watching. Still, even after all these weeks. Even after the others had come looking with rifles in doubt, he hadn't turned his back on her. He'd saved her, the way she'd saved his child. Not out of debt, out of something older, something wordless. She sat there long after he was gone, soaked to the bone, shivering, the wind brushing against her wet skin like a second river. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breathing steadied, but her world had shifted again. Not like it had the first time. This was different. This was trust returned. Back at the cabin, she changed out of her clothes, lit the stove, and stood barefoot on the old pine floors, staring out the window. The trees swayed gently now. The storm had quieted. But the river hadn't, and something in her hadn't either. She sat beside the hearth that night with a quilt wrapped around her legs, the carved dog still resting on the mantel. She thought about the look in his eyes, the weight of his arm as it pulled her from the current, the way he hadn't hesitated, the way he hadn't spoken. The silence between them said everything. Outside, the wind shifted again. The trees whispered in ways she could almost understand. And far off, maybe from the ridge or just beyond the bend, a sound carried low and deep. Not a howl, not a warning. A pulse, like a drum or a heart, reminding her she wasn't alone in these woods. Not anymore. They called her the Woman of Hoback after she was gone. Not in headlines or history books, just in the way locals passed her story across truck beds and diner booths, their voices softening without meaning to. It was the kind of name that lingered in a town like that, small enough for the trees to remember, old enough for the river to keep the rest. The cabin she left behind still stood, shingled and quiet, pressed into the base of the hillside like it had grown there. A single chimney, moss rising along its side, one crooked window that always seemed to catch the last bit of daylight before dusk. People didn't visit much, not out of fear, out of reverence. Some said they still saw her, standing by the water's edge just after first frost, her silhouette sharp against the morning steam. Some swore they saw something larger moving beyond her, in the trees or fog, or just past what the eye wanted to see. But most folks didn't talk too loud about that. Around here, you learn what deserves to be spoken and what ought to stay quiet. And stories like hers don't need retelling to be remembered. After the bank collapsed, and after the creature pulled her from the flood like it was muscle memory, something shifted. Not just in Maren, but in the land. The cabin grew quieter. The air held a kind of stillness that didn't feel empty. She spoke less, moved slower, not out of sorrow, but something closer to awe. She started stacking firewood differently, 3 neat lines instead of one long pile. She carved small things with her hands, left them in odd places along the trail. A curled feather, a curled sleeping dog, a fist to a heart to the ground. Some she buried beneath stones, some she didn't. And when strangers asked about the carvings, she just smiled. That winter came early. Snow dipped into the valley in early November, clinging to the edges of the willows and freezing the bend in the river where everything began. She walked it daily, always alone, always unarmed. She never told anyone what she was looking for. She didn't need to. What she got instead, what she received, was presence. A feather left on the porch, thick and dark with an iridescent sheen. A fish, fresh and whole, placed carefully on a flat stone near the stump where Copper used to rest. A stack of pebbles, 3 wide ones at the base, a smaller one on top, and then a round one, dark and smooth, pressed with a single fingerprint in dried mud. She didn't ask what they meant. She didn't ask for more. One morning in late December, The sky broke open just enough to let the cold sun spill through, and Maren packed her last bag. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There wasn't a moment of farewell or a line drawn in the frost. She simply folded her old flannel shirts, rolled the carved dog in a scarf, and left a note no one would read pinned to the inside of the pantry door. No one came looking. No one needed to. Folks assumed she left for somewhere warmer, Arizona maybe, or to be near family if she had any. But if anyone looked close, the old truck still sat there under the carport, half sunk in the snow, untouched. They say that's spring. A young couple tried to hike the ridge behind the cabin but turned around near dusk after hearing something move in the brush. Something tall and quiet and watching. They say the woman saw footprints along the riverbank that didn't belong to man or moose, and she didn't speak a word the entire drive back to Jackson. Not long after, someone nailed a small wooden sign into a tree just off the road before the cabin turnoff. No fancy lettering. Just hand-carved in rough script, burned in with the edge of a steel rod. It read, "Dogs crossing." People slowed when they passed it. Even those who didn't know the story. Something about it made them take their foot off the gas. And every once in a while, on quiet nights when the wind shifted just right, someone camping near the bend said they heard it. That sound. Not howling, not drumming, just a soft thump. 3 gentle knocks, low to the ground, like a heartbeat slowed with time. Some said it was the old woman knocking back from wherever she went. Some said it was the creature, keeping rhythm with the earth. But the older folks, those who'd lived longest under those trees, said different. They said it wasn't a warning, or a call, or a sign. It was memory, pressed into the ground. Because nothing with kindness in it ever really leaves Hoback. Not fully. Not forever. They said the land remembers who you are when you choose mercy over fear. When you put your body between danger and the defenseless. When you reach into a river not to take, but to give back what you can. And maybe that's all we really are in the end. Not what we built. Not what we kept, but what we saved. What we chose to lift up when no one else would. And that memory, if the ground is soft enough, lasts longer than blood or names or fences on a deed. Late one October, a girl from Bondurant hiked down with her grandfather to look for animal tracks. She paused near the willows, knelt beside the water, and touched something half buried under leaves. A piece of wood, worn smooth, no bigger than her hand. A carving, a sleeping dog. She showed it to her grandpa. He turned it over and didn't say a word. Just looked at the river, his eyes quiet, like he remembered something he never told her. She took the carving home and placed it on her windowsill. At night, when the wind blew cold through the trees, she sometimes pressed her ear to the glass and listened. And once, just once, she heard it. A soft thump beneath the floorboards, like something knocking, not to enter, but to be remembered. And she whispered to no one in particular, "I remember you." And the forest, she swore, whispered back. Some stories stay with us not because of how loud they roared, but because of how quietly they asked us to feel something, to stop for a moment, to listen, not to the world outside, but to the one inside, where grief and grace live side by side. This story, in its bones, was never really about monsters or mysteries, not even about rivers or rescue. It was always about what we choose when the moment comes, when we're given the chance to look past fear and answer with something softer, something stronger. There are things in this world we may never understand. Shapes in the trees, sounds at the edge of night, eyes watching us from just beyond the firelight. And maybe we're not meant to name them. Maybe it's enough to respect that not everything wild is dangerous, and not everything unknown is meant to be feared. Sometimes, what we call mystery is just another kind of truth, one we haven't learned how to hold yet. But kindness is never a mystery. It is the one language spoken by all hearts, the one instinct that doesn't need translation. It's the hand we extend before we know what's reaching back. It's the space we keep open for those who are different, silent, wounded, or wild. And sometimes, it's the simple act of staying, of witnessing, of not turning away when something vulnerable needs us most. Because the measure of who we are has never been found in our strength, but in our mercy. It's not the walls we build that define us, it's the moments we break them down. For a stranger, for a creature, for the ones who cannot ask, but hope we'll see them anyway. And perhaps that's the real legacy any of us leave behind. Not in the things we owned or the names we carried, but in the lives we touched when no one was watching. In the echoes we left on quiet riverbanks, in footprints softened by time, in small carved tokens buried under moss and memory. This story has run its course now, like the river after a long storm, quieter, deeper, still moving. But maybe its current found something in you, a memory, a longing, a truth you didn't expect. If it did, thank you for letting it in. And if something in this story stirred your heart tonight, if it reminded you of a moment you can't quite name or a person you never stopped loving, we'd be honored to hear from you. Let us know where you're listening from, what stayed with you, or simply leave a few words in the comments below. And if these stories speak to something true in you, we'd be grateful if you liked, subscribed, or shared this with someone who might need it. Because sometimes, all it takes is a story to remember who we really are. Thank you for being here. And until next time, take care of each other.